Hello, everybody, and welcome to a discussion about an issue that is so big, is so pervasive that, frankly, I almost don't know how to get a handle on it. But to help me today, we have two guests who do know how to get a handle on this issue. We're very delighted to have Lena Kahn with us. Lena is Director of Legal Policy with the Open Markets Institute, and she researches antitrust law and competition policy and identifies potential legal reforms. And the issue that we're going to be discussing today is where we go from here when you have a handful of incredibly large information technology outlets like Facebook and Google, and how we address that in the many manifestations of the problems that we have to deal with. And we also have with us Sarah Miller, and Sarah has been involved with a lot of organizations fighting for economic and social justice here in Washington, D.C. So both of you, thank you very, very much for being with us. Okay, here is my problem about this issue. It is so huge. So let's look at information technology and what is going on in terms of, say, privacy, in terms of media, in terms of monopoly. How's that? Let's talk about those three issues. All right. If somebody were to tell you that right now there is an entity out there, some entity or another, either in the private sector or in the government, that knows every telephone call that you made and to whom you made that phone call, knows every website that you visited, knows every email that you sent, knows perhaps every product that you purchased, maybe knows your medical records or your financial records, i.e. knows an enormous amount about you, knows where you are sitting at this very second and where you were yesterday. Would I be paranoid in making that suggestion?
No. That's exactly the reality that we face today with Facebook. Not only that, they also know how you're feeling, know what you're thinking. A few years ago, it was revealed that Facebook had basically conducted a psychological experiment on users. So I think we're at an unprecedented moment where these companies have a level of insight and information about individuals in a way that we've never experienced in history.
Right. And it's important to note why they want all this information, right? They want to know as much about us as possible so they can then sell and rent that data on to advertisers who are their true customers. So the more specific information they can get about us, the more that they'll be able to help advertisers or other actors who want to use their platform manipulate us according to their own ends.
You know, this sounds like 1984, Orwell's 1984 plus a whole lot. I mean, this is a technology that has gone beyond where I think Orwell even dreamed that it could go. And to me, it is really quite amazing that there has not been an uproar on the part of the American people who say, you know what, my life is my life. I don't want anybody else to know where I am, where I'm going, what I bought, what my medical records are. But it is so obviously apparent that this technology has outstripped public policy in terms of protecting, among other things, a personal privacy, that it is really quite frightening. Sarah makes the point that there is a method in all of this madness. It's not just that these guys are staying up nights trying to know everything about you. There is a reason for that. And Sarah, you touched on it. Lena, you want to elaborate a little bit more? What is their economic purpose? What does it mean that they know so much about you? What can they do with that information?
Right, so the true purpose of these companies, the way they make money, the way Facebook and Google make money is through ads. So the purpose is to have users stay on their platforms and spend as much time there as possible, because that means that then they can make more money from advertisers. As a result, that means that Facebook, when it's organizing what you see, it's going to try and make you see the most sensational piece of news to try and kind of elicit a reaction from you. And so what that means is that Facebook's business model is perfect privileging sensational content, privileging misinformation, and that's at odds with the kind of the social purpose that it's now playing in society, right? Facebook is now effectively this essential communication service. Yet it is an essential communication service that is instead, operating on principles that are hurting us because it's privileging bad information.
All right. So, number one, it wants us to stay on, to be exposed to more advertising. Yes.
Exactly.
And number two, it makes this technology different than, say, watching NBC or CBS. They put an ad on that goes to everybody, young and old and so forth. But now, because of the information that they have about each and every one of us, they can target that advertising, right?
Yeah.
So somebody knows that you are a woman, you're interested in this, you're interested in that. Maybe you're thinking about going on a holiday to the Caribbean, right? And they suddenly, what might appear on your screen is a travel agency or something telling you about that. Yes?
Right, that's the fundamental way the business model works, right? And doesn't only have to be, we hear advertisers and we think travel agencies or bookstores or furniture shops, but it can be essentially any actor can try to target you. It's not just a commercial entity, it can be political actors, as we've very much learned, right? It can be virtually anyone.
Right, and they've actually studied the techniques used by the gambling industry to figure out how to addict people to their apps. And you have a whole record of executives now saying from these companies, we don't let our children on these apps. So there's a recognition that that these technologies are very addictive, and that has huge consequences for children, especially. And yet, we're basically living through a growing public health epidemic
of
addiction to these technologies. Depression rates among children, among teenagers are going up, in part because of the addiction feature of these technologies and all of the kind of social effects that has. So, we're talking about advertising, but that there's a huge public health element here too.
All right, I want to stay for a moment on the ability for Facebook, et cetera, to target advertising. That is a revolutionary new development, right? You're not an older male, right? They're going to focus on you. How do they do that? How do they get that information to make that advertising profitable for them?
They track everything that you do on Facebook's platform, but they also track all of your browsing. They see what you're doing on other parts of the internet. We just got news that they have also been tracking your phone calls, your text messages, and so they use that information, and that's how they're selling the advertisers the promise of being able to target specifically you, Senator Sanders.
Right.
And that's an enormous amount of information. I think we're only at the very earliest stages of seeing how they can abuse this information.
Okay, and we're going to talk about politics and its political implication in a moment, but you're right. You're saying this is an early stage. If we don't get a handle on this, if we don't develop public policy to address this, where are we going to be in 10, 20 years when this technology is exploding every single day? What happens in 10, 20 years? Sarah, you got thoughts on that?
Well, I think we're kind of at a moment where we need to really reckon with this, and we need to look towards our leaders in Congress. We need to look towards institutions like the Federal Trade Commission, and we need to educate users of these platforms themselves. So one initiative that we launched last week called I'mNotYourProduct.com teaches people how to delink their accounts from targeted ads. So if you don't want your children receiving targeted ads, but they want to use Facebook, you can follow these steps and turn most of them off to make it safer for you and your family. It also just indicates how the business model is designed to keep a user in the targeted ad system. They make it very hard. So what we're asking Mark Zuckerberg to do through this initiative is to make a one-click option. So if you don't want to be targeted by anyone who wants this data, you can opt out of that and continue to use the platform.
All right, let me switch to an issue that I get a little bit involved in, that's politics. All right. What are the, and obviously we know what having gone through the 2016 election and the role the Russians played and others, but why don't you tell us a little bit about the political implications of me knowing so much about you? What can I do with that information?
You can do a whole lot with that information. I think one of the key issues here is that this is undermining democracy because Facebook controls access, right? It controls access. It controls how you communicate to people, right? Even right now, how are we airing this? It's through Facebook, and so I think it's able to use that access to show information it likes and not show information it doesn't like. This has huge implications for the journalism industry, for what news gets shown and what doesn't get shown. Companies that get to control access to the news ultimately control what that news is.
But also, if I know what products you are buying, what car you drive, who you like, I can have a pretty good sense of where you're coming politically, and I can frame a message to you to try to move you in a different direction. Yes?
Yes.
And that's what we saw in 2016, and that also has enormous potential, does it not?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's manipulation.
Right, more than potential. Right, we've seen this happen in the U.S. We've seen it happen in other countries too, right? Where bad actors figure out how to, use the platform, and frankly, it's not very hard to tap into people's existing prejudices, against existing biases, existing viewpoints, and so social discord and division that affects,
And the
serious
Russians
outcomes.
did it really quite
Yeah.
brilliantly. I think I was really surprised at their level of sophistication
Yeah.
in knowing how to appeal to people and try to divide the country up or move forward in the direction that they wanted to. All right, so we got a privacy issue here of enormous consequence. And what worries me again is that people seem, especially many young people, seem to say, oh, this is the way it is. I guess everybody is going to know what I do with my life. And that bothers me that people seem to accept that level of privacy invasion. All right, got that. We talked a little bit about the impact for media. It will be Facebook determining what pops up today on your computer, right? Whether or not it's going to be the New York Times or somebody else. And that's an enormous amount of power. Anyone want to go into that a little bit?
Sure. So around 50% of Americans now rely on Facebook to get their news. The news organizations are very dependent on Facebook. Facebook can just press a button and its algorithm change, and that means that news publishers can see traffic to their sites plummet by 50, 60, 70% just because Facebook pressed a button. Similarly, Facebook
By changing their algorithm.
Exactly, changing their algorithm. Facebook can change its algorithm to say we're going to privilege video. So all of a sudden, you have all these journalists now saying we're going to produce video
All right,
instead.
so Facebook not only has the capability, is in the process of having recently changed this algorithm. And from my understanding, what that means is a lot of the mainstream media, New York Times, CNN, NBC, etc., I've seen a significant decline in the engagements that they receive. My understanding is, by the way, that some conservative media outlets like Fox and Daily Mail have seen an increase. But be that as it may, they can create the algorithms to determine that.
Exactly. And I think at the end of the day, even if tomorrow they favored a news site that you like, I think the question comes down to, should Mark Zuckerberg have this level
That's right.
of power?
That is exactly the question. It's not what I like or you like, whether it's one person, it's like the Postal Service deciding that they're going to deliver to your house, but not to your house.
Exactly.
That's not the way it should be done. And this is a really scary situation if we believe, as I think we three do, that people should be allowed, to hear all kinds of points of view in a free and unfettered way. Which, by the way, then takes us to another issue that the Congress is dealing with right now, and that is net neutrality. Say a word about how all of this is impacted by net neutrality.
So if net neutrality is repealed, if it doesn't come back, then what that means is that potential competitors to Facebook, potential other websites are not really going to have a fair shot. They're not going to be able to bring their product to market, to reach users, to reach citizens, and that's going to make sure that that there's not going to be a level playing field, right? It's going to stay totally stacked towards Facebook, towards Google, towards Amazon. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it's interesting because at the earlier part of the net neutrality fight, Google, Facebook were really on board for net neutrality. This time around, they're just lukewarm because they know that it's not going to affect them. And if anything, it could benefit them because it means that no companies are going to be able to compete with them in the same way. So it's a huge issue and it's very much connected.
All right, we can go on and on with all of the ramifications of this exploding technology, which is changing literally every day. But there is an area that you have written about, and I think you're a best-selling Yale Law Review writer. You have written an article for Yale Law Review on monopoly. Will you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in that area?
Sure. So, growing consolidation, growing monopolization is a big issue for us. Almost industry after industry is now dominated by a handful of big businesses, and that is because we've failed to enforce our antitrust laws. And this is happening, we're talking about the big tech companies, but this is true across the board. It's true in airlines, it's true in healthcare, it's true in rental cars, it's true in food and agriculture. Why that matters for the tech companies is because the tech companies too have grown in part through acquiring other businesses. So, Facebook enjoys the power that it does today in part because it was allowed to buy up Instagram, it was allowed to buy up WhatsApp, and that meant that it was able to lock in more and more users on its platform. So, as the Cambridge Analytica scandal broke, you heard a lot of people say, I'm quitting Facebook, but I'm just going to go use Instagram or just use WhatsApp. Guess what? You're still on Facebook's property. So I think, the fact that Facebook is a monopoly and has a lot of power comes back to good part to the fact that we don't really enforce our antitrust laws in a good way anymore.
If I don't like Facebook, I'm going to go to their competitors, right? Because we have a free market society, and if they don't do what I want, I'm just going someplace else. So if I don't like Facebook, where am I going? Any place I can go? Now, I recall when Zuckerberg was up here on Capitol Hill last month, he was asked just that question, is Facebook a monopoly, I think was the question. His answer was not all that persuasive, was it?
No.
Who wants to discuss that? And so is Facebook a monopoly?
Yes. I think there's no question that Facebook is a monopoly. They don't face any direct competitors, and I think, in fact, that their goal is to dominate the entire kind of market in the social media space, and they're succeeding in that goal. Before competitors can get off the ground, Facebook either copies them to snuff them out or buys them up. So this is a long-term strategy.
They have a history, and that is what they're give us some examples of that strategy.
Absolutely. So concerningly, they've bought face recognition software, right? Because this isn't only about buying up potential competitors. It's about adding on more capabilities to collect even more data, right? So they've purchased, like Lena said, major competitors at kind of wildly inflated prices. WhatsApp was a $19 billion deal that turned heads because I think it was only valued at a couple $100 million at the time. So this is a strategy of Facebook's to lock out other competitors. They understand the benefits to their bottom line to be a monopoly and to not give users any choice when they experience something like Cambridge Analytica and people say they want to leave, but then time goes by and they miss the functionalities that Facebook offers that do help people stay connected and are important to preserve.
And these are enormously large companies, are they not?
They're the most powerful companies in the world.
And their size is, just extraordinary in terms of the revenue that they generate and so forth.
Right.
All right. We've talked a little bit about the problems, and they are enormous. And I think as a nation, by the way, and that's what we're trying to do today, is to start that discussion. Because I think, is it fair to say, we have not had that kind of discussion, that this technology is far advanced of where the American people understand the problem is and where we've got to go. Okay, what's happening around the rest of the world in response to this? What should the FTC be doing? What should the United States Congress be doing to help address some of the concerns that we discussed today?
Well, we think first and foremost, we all just need to recognize that Facebook is a monopoly. And because of that, there needs to be more accountability in the system. And if we reintroduce competition, if there are competing actors in the social media space, then the market will help to solve some of these problems and create some accountability. That's not the full answer, but we strongly believe and support the Federal Trade Commission requiring Facebook to spin off WhatsApp and Instagram and Messenger so you can have 3 different competing platforms. It's something that we're calling for. We also support, as many others do, extremely strong privacy regulations, which the FTC could impose because of the consent decree that Facebook has, I think, likely violated. Facebook is facing potentially fines up into the trillions of dollars because of their violation of the 2011 consent decree around Cambridge Analytica. So there's a moment where there's tremendous leverage. The government has tremendous leverage over Facebook because of that. And first and foremost, we need to break Facebook's power.
Lena, you want to add to what Sarah said?
I think that's exactly right. And I think one of the first steps is to make sure Facebook is not acquiring further power, right?
Yeah.
So if Facebook tomorrow announces that it's acquiring another company, I would hope that the FTC would look at that very closely and block it. So I think making sure that it's not just out there expanding its power is really important. I think it's also important that we have a system of outside checks, so it's not just Zuckerberg determining who sees what information. I think we're at an unprecedented moment.
In terms of privacy, the Europeans are a little bit advanced over where we are. Is that correct?
Exactly. Later this month, they're putting into effect a big new set of privacy regulations that are going to limit how much information Facebook, Google, and these companies can get on people without their permission.
Okay. And Sarah, you mentioned a moment ago that you would like to see people have the option of not having all of that information about them collected, yes?
Right.
And tell us again how that would work.
Yes, so we launched an initiative last week called I'mNotYourProduct.com, and it teaches.
I love that title. I am not your product.
Because that's what people are, right? They are the product, right? All of their data is the product. This data that is theirs is enriching Mark Zuckerberg personally, and it's being abused and mishandled, right? So I'mNotYourProduct.com walks people through step by step, anyone can do it, how you can turn off all of this targeted advertising. And it also just illustrates how purposefully complicated it is to do that, because that is how Facebook makes their money off of you. So you can go through these steps and then continue to use the platform as you would any other without losing any core functionality. And you can also sign our petition to Mark Zuckerberg saying, give us one click to turn all this off. Don't
So you want to make it simpler.
One click, exactly. We want to make it simpler, and we think if they are sincere in their apology to the American people, then they will provide that option to us.
Are you sensing more concern and interest among the American people on these issues, or not?
I think there was definitely, a real moment after the Cambridge Analytica moment about just how much information Facebook has and how that can be abused. I think people are in a difficult position, right? Because Facebook does let you communicate with people. Outside in other countries, Facebook is the main way that people communicate. Even the government communicates to citizens through Facebook. So I think people are very worried about it, but they don't feel like they have options.
I think also leadership from people like you, from your colleagues, from others, to not be afraid to take on Facebook, even though taking on a corporation that is the intermediary between you and your audience is a scary thing to do. That sort of leadership is really important, and I think that's why it's great that we're having this conversation today.
All right, let me just say this to the audience, that this is kind of the beginning of the discussion, not the end of the discussion. What we have discussed today is the fact that there is technology out there that is changing every day, that is exploding, that will be very much advanced 10 years from now or tomorrow than it is today, that is incredibly invasive, that has enormous commercial implications. If I know everything about you, I can sell you products. That has enormous political implications, that if I know all about you, I know where your soft spots are, how I can appeal to you politically, how I can get you to hate her, and so forth and so on. It is, to me, just beyond comprehension that we have government that has basically ignored. I think we're still operating under internet law from 1986 or something like that?
You would know. She's the lawyer.
From a while ago, yeah.
I mean, just think about how the world has changed since 1986. We're still operating under those laws. And there is a reason for that too, but that's got to change. And what we need is the American people to stand up on this issue and say, as I think both of you have said, we like the technology. We're not here. I may be a Luddite. You guys are not. We appreciate the technology. It does extraordinary things. But we want to utilize that technology in a way that it is not destructive to democracy, to privacy rights, to basic freedoms. And I think we can do that.
That's right.
And that's the goal, to utilize the technology in a way that works for everybody, and not just as a profit-making tool for a very few people. So we got an enormous amount of work that has to be done. My hope is that on our Facebook page, that your comments will generate interest, that will get some ideas from people. Again, we're entering into a new territory here. So we need a whole lot of ideas from you out there as to how you think Congress can best go forward, what the FTC can be doing. But this is an issue of huge consequence, and we're going to get moving forward on it. So I just want to thank Lena and Sarah very much for the work that they are doing and for their presence here today. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.